There is a type of literature that's power comes from attention. Attention to inner life, fleeting moments, and the subtle rhythms of existence. This is the literature of solitude, novels and memoirs that explore quiet reflection, introspection, and the spaces of life often overlooked. These works invite readers to slow down and to linger, and to witness the beauty, pain, and profundity that dwell in silence. But solitude in literature is not always about loneliness. It can be sanctuary, a lens for observation, or a space for creativity and contemplation. Across cultures and centuries, writers have explored the lives of individuals in quiet settings, the rhythms of ordinary life, and the reflective moments that reveal universal truths. In a world dominated by noise and constant stimulation, the literature of solitude reminds us that profound insights often unfold in silence. Sometimes you don't want tales of adventure, action, and fast-paced plots. Sometimes it's nice to slow down and spend some time in the quiet. First, I cannot talk about literature of solitude without first mentioning the famous book by Henry David Thoreau, Walden, Solitude, Nature, and the Art of Living Deliberately. When Henry David Thoreau published Walden in 1854, he presented not just a memoir of 2 years spent by a pond in Concord, Massachusetts, but a manifesto for living. The book occupies an unusual space between philosophy, natural observation, autobiography, and social critique. At its heart lies an experiment. What happens when one withdraws from the bustle of commerce, politics, and routine society, and instead lives simply, close to nature, guided by the principle of self-reliance? In answering this question, Walden became one of the foundational texts of American literature, and continues to challenge modern readers with its call to live deliberately. In July 1845, Thoreau built a small cabin on land owned by his friend and mentor Ralph Waldo Emerson near Walden Pond. His purpose was not to escape society entirely, but to create space for reflection. He cultivated beans, fished, read, wrote, and engaged with the natural rhythms around him. He lived there for just 2 years, but the experience gave rise to Walden, a book that condenses those years into a philosophical meditation. The decision to move to the woods was deliberate and symbolic. The pond, trees, and seasons are not just a backdrop, they are teachers, mirrors for self-discovery. Walden is often remembered for its celebration of solitude and nature, but it is equally a critique of the society Thoreau left behind. Early in the book, he attacks the quiet desperation with which most people live, shackled by unnecessary labour, debt, and the pursuit of possessions. The farmer, he suggests, is enslaved by his farm rather than freed by it. The railroad, a marvel of modern progress, strikes him as a form of enslavement, since people toil their whole lives to afford speed and convenience. So Thoreau's emphasis is not on rejecting civilization outright, but on questioning its priorities. His experiment demonstrates that one can live on very little. His famous cost breakdown for building his cabin shows how cheaply he lived compared to his neighbours. What matters is not how much one owns, but how one uses time, attention, and energy. For Thoreau, freedom comes when one refuses to measure life by material accumulation. One of the enduring pleasures of Walden lies in Thoreau's descriptions of the natural world. His attention to detail is scientific in its precision and poetic in its resonance. He records the songs of birds, the ice breaking on the pond in spring, the tracks of animals in snow. Each observation becomes an entry point into reflection. For instance, when he watches ants in battle, he muses on the parallels between human wars and the miniature struggles beneath his feet. Walden Pond itself becomes a character in the book. Thoreau describes its colour, its clarity, and the changing surface with reverence, finding in it a symbol of purity and renewal. Nature for him is not merely a resource, but a text to be read, an intercolour offering wisdom. In this way, Walden merges natural history with moral philosophy, suggesting that careful observation of the natural world yields insights into how humans might live more authentically. Solitude is central to Thoreau's project. He lived alone, cooked his own meals, and often spent days without speaking to anyone. Yet he insists he was never lonely. His solitude is not isolation, but a deepening of connection to nature, to his own thoughts, and even to humanity as a whole. The solitude fosters self-reliance. Thoreau builds his cabin with his own hands, grows his own food, and teaches himself through books and direct experience. But self-reliance for him is not rugged individualism in the modern sense. It is not about rejecting community or denying interdependence. Rather, it is about cultivating independence of thought and spirit, freeing oneself from blind conformity to social norms. His solitude allows him to test whether one can truly live according to one's own principles. Walden is structured around cycles of time, particularly the changing seasons. Each season brings its own labours and lessons, planting beans in summer, chopping wood in winter, watching the thaw of ice in spring. Time, for Thoreau, is not to be filled with frantic activity but savoured in its unfolding. He criticises the way that society wastes life in endless work, pointing out that people rush toward the future without inhabiting the present. The cyclical structure reinforces his philosophy. By attuning himself to these rhythms, Thoreau discovers renewal, patience, and perspective. There is also a spiritual dimension to the story. Though Walden is not necessarily a religious text, it resonates with spiritual undertones. Thoreau's vision of nature is suffused with reverence. He often draws on biblical language, classical references, and Eastern philosophy, blending traditions into his form of transcendental spirituality. The pond, in its purity, suggests baptism and rebirth, the woods, a place of revelation. His spirituality is inseparable from his ethics. To live deliberately is a moral stance, a refusal to squander life on trivialities. He urges readers to wake up, to shake off dull conformity, and to recognize the sacred possibilities of every moment. In the modern era of digital distraction, climate crisis, and relentless consumption, Walden feels newly urgent. Thoreau's call to slow down, pay attention, and live with intention resonates with readers who seek alternatives to a culture of speed and accumulation. His insistence that the mass of man lead lives of quiet desperation challenges us to ask, what would it mean to live fully, consciously, deliberately? Walden is not just an account of life in a cabin, but a meditation on the art of living. Through solitude, simplicity, and immersion in nature, Thoreau sought clarity and freedom from the distortions of society. His writing weaves natural observation, philosophical reflection, and cultural critique into work that is both personal and universal. More than 170 years later, Walden still speaks to the deepest anxieties of modern life. It asks whether we are truly living or merely existing, whether our possessions serve us or enslave us, whether we can hear the wisdom of the world around us. Thoreau's answer is clear. To live deliberately is to live authentically, awake to the beauty of nature and the dignity of the human spirit. My second pick is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. To the Lighthouse, published in 1927, is one of the defining works of literary modernism, a novel that abandons traditional plot in favour of impression, memory, and interior reflection. At its heart lies the story of the Ramsay family and their summers at a house on the Isle of Skye. The novel's action is modest, plans for a trip to the lighthouse, conversations between family and guests, the passage of time through an abandoned house. But the emotional and psychological terrain it covers is vast. One of the most compelling themes inside the book is, of course, solitude, the solitude of individual consciousness, the solitude imposed by time and mortality, and the ways characters both resist and embrace the condition of being alone. Woolf famously employs a stream of consciousness technique, allowing readers to inhabit the shifting perspectives of her characters. This stylistic choice underscores a central truth of the novel. Each person lives within a private world of thought and feeling. Mrs. Ramsay gazes out at her children and guests, but what we hear is her own interior monologue, her anxieties about their futures, her reflections on love and mortality. Mr. Ramsay, meanwhile, frets about his philosophical work and his fear of obscurity, thoughts he rarely articulates. Even when characters share the same room, Woolf reveals that they remain enclosed within separate mental landscapes. But this solitude is not always painful. At times it enables clarity and creativity. Lily Briscoe, the artist who struggles with her painting, finds in solitude the space to pursue her vision. Yet Woolf suggests that the solitude of consciousness is inescapable. Even in love or family life, one cannot entirely bridge the gap between self and other. The novel dramatizes this paradox. Human beings long for connection, yet they are always, at least, partly alone. The middle section of this novel, Time Passes, offers perhaps the most striking portrayal of solitude. The Ramseys' summer home sits abandoned for years, battered by storms, dust, and decay. Human presence recedes, and Woolf describes the silent passage of time with a haunting impersonality. The deaths of Mrs. Ramsay, Prue, and Andrew occur almost offhandedly, as brief parenthetical remarks emphasizing how small human lives seem against the vast backdrop of time. Here, solitude is cosmic rather than personal, the solitude of human beings in the face of nature's indifference and the inevitability of death. The empty house becomes a symbol of absence, reminding readers that solitude is not only the condition of thought, but also the condition of existence itself. Each life unfolds alone, subject to the erasures of time. Paradoxically, the Ramseys' marriage also demonstrates solitude. Mrs. Ramsay seeks to provide her husband with emotional reassurance, but his intellectual anxieties remain largely inescapable to her. Their love is real but limited, shaped by the boundaries of separate minds. Similarly, the children orbit their parents with love, fear, or irritation, but Woolf continually underscores the unbridgeable distance between generations. At the same time, these relationships suggest that solitude need not negate connection. Mrs. Ramsay's acts of hospitality, arranging dinners and fostering marriages, nurturing her children, create moments of fleeting unity. These moments, however fragile, testify to the human capacity to resist solitude through affection and ritual. Yet the novel's power lies in its honesty. Such moments do not erase solitude, they only temporarily soften its edges. To the Lighthouse is not a novel of plot, but of perception, and solitude is woven into its structure as much as its content. Each character's inner voice reminds us that the mind is its own chamber, inaccessible to others. The passage of time, with its silent erasures, emphasizes the solitary nature of human existence. Yet, through Lily Briscoe's painting and Mrs. Ramsay's acts of love, Woolf suggests that solitude can be fertile ground for creativity and compassion. Ultimately, the novel does not lament solitude so much as it acknowledges its inevitability. Human beings, Woolf implies, are islands of consciousness, yet islands connected by glimpses of understanding, by art, and by fleeting moments of togetherness. Into the Lighthouse, solitude is not merely absence, it is the condition in which meaning, art, and even love become possible. Next, I have Stoner by John Williams. John Williams' Stoner is often hailed as one of the great rediscovered novels of the 20th century, a quiet yet devastating story of an ordinary man who leads an unremarkable life. Beneath its surface simplicity, however, the novel is a profound study of solitude, on the isolation that defines William Stoner's existence as a son, husband, teacher, and human being. Far from portraying solitude as a dramatic event, Williams embeds it in the fabric of daily life, showing how it permeates Stoner's personal relationships, professional struggles, and inner world. At its core, Stoner is the story of a man out of place. Born into a poor Missouri farming family, William Stoner is sent to university to study agriculture, but he soon discovers literature and shifts his life's course. This decision alienates him from his parents, who cannot understand the allure of books or the abandonment of practical farming life. The break is not hostile, but it is irrevocable. Stoner quietly severs himself from the expectations of his family and enters into a world where they cannot follow. This initial act of solitude, choosing life of the mind over the life of soil, sets the tone for the rest of the novel. Stoner's marriage to Edith further cements his loneliness. Initially hopeful, their relationship deteriorates almost immediately. Edith, distant and unstable, retreats into her own private world, leaving Stoner stranded within the confines of a loveless marriage. Their home becomes a space not of intimacy, but of estrangement, where silence and coldness replace warmth and companionship. Even their daughter, Grace, whom Stoner loves deeply, is gradually pulled away from him by Edith's manipulations. This cruel irony of this domestic solitude is that it occurs not through physical absence, but through the suffocating presence of people who fail to connect. Stoner's professional life offers him both refuge and further isolation. As a teacher, he finds meaning and dignity in literature. His devotion to his subject is one of the few aspects of his life where he achieves genuine fulfillment. Yet even here he is marked by solitude. His colleagues, such as the antagonistic Hollis Lomax, undermine him, and academic politics alienate him from the institution he has devoted his life to. He does not climb the ranks of the university. He remains, until the end, a modest, largely unnoticed professor. His work is meaningful to him, but it fails to confer recognition, leaving him isolated within the very institution that defined his identity. Perhaps the most moving exploration of solitude in Stoner lies in his brief affair with Catherine Driscoll. For a short time, Stoner experiences intimacy, companionship, and the kind of love that seems to redeem his otherwise desolate life. Their relationship offers a glimpse of what life could have been, a fulfillment of his longing for connection. But even this is taken from him, as university politics and social pressures force them apart. The affair ends not with an explosive drama, but with quiet resignation, reinforcing the novel's central themes. Solitude is not an exception in Stoner's life, but its governing principle. Williams writes in a restrained, understated prose that mirrors Stoner's quiet existence. There are no grand climaxes, no dramatic twists. Life unfolds as it does for most people, in small disappointments, fleeting joys, and long stretches of monotony. The solitude of Stoner's life is mirrored in the solitude of the text, its refusal to embellish, its commitment to simplicity. Williams's style insists that Stoner's story, though ordinary, has its own quiet grandeur. Yet Stoner is not simply a bleak portrait of isolation. The solitude in the novel is also deeply existential, a condition of human life itself. Stoner's devotion to literature, despite the lack of recognition, reveals a certain dignity in solitude. His teaching, his reading, and even his disappointments reflect a life lived earnestly, if not triumphantly. By the time of his death, Stoner has no great achievements to his name, no legacy that will carry his memory forward, and yet his solitude is not meaningless. It is the quiet truth of an ordinary life, lived with integrity and persistence. Ultimately, Stoner is a book about solitude because it presents a man whose life is defined not by connection or triumph, but by estrangement and quiet perseverance. From his estrangement from his parents, to his loveless marriage, to his unremarkable academic career, and even to his death, Stoner remains a solitary figure. And yet, within that solitude lies the essence of his humanity. Williams shows us that even in isolation, life has meaning, not in glory, but in endurance, in the quiet dignity of continuing despite the silence. Next, I have Yoko Ogawa's The Housekeeper and the Professor. This is a tender novel about memory, mathematics, and human connection. On its surface, it tells a story of an unlikely friendship between a brilliant but brain-damaged mathematician, his housekeeper, and her young son. Yet beneath this warmth lies a profound meditation on solitude, on how memory loss, social withdrawal, and the quiet barriers between individuals isolate them from one another. The housekeeper and the professor live in silence as much as in conversation, in distance as much as in connection. The professor's solitude is the most striking. Once a respected mathematician, he now suffers from a memory that lasts only 80 minutes, the result of a car accident decades earlier. His condition isolates him not only from the people around him, but from time itself. Each new day, each new interaction must be reconstructed from scratch, leaving him trapped in a perpetual present. The professor's mind itself is solitary, cut off from continuity, unable to sustain the long arcs of memory that anchor us to relationships and to ourselves. Yet his solitude is not total. Mathematics becomes his bridge to the world. Numbers, prime sequences, and equations are the professor's language of connection, a means of communicating beauty and order despite his fractured memory. The professor sustains a fragile but enduring bond with the housekeeper and her son through mathematics, a language that transcends memory. The housekeeper, too, embodies solitude. She is a single mother, largely cut off from society, her life consumed by work and the raising of her son. She is never given a name, reinforces this isolation. She is defined not as an individual, but in relation to others, as a servant, as a mother, as a caretaker. And yet, in caring for the professor, she discovers a new form of intimacy that pushes back against her solitude. Their household becomes a small, self-contained world of companionship, even as it remains fragile and fleeting. The novel oscillates between isolation and connection, between the quiet loneliness of memory loss and the fleeting bonds created through kindness and intellectual wonder. The novel reminds us that solitude is a given of human existence. We are always, in some sense, alone within our own minds, but it is not incompatible with moments of love, tenderness, and beauty. Next, I have Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day is one of the most haunting explorations of solitude in modern fiction. Told through the voice of Stevens, an aging English butler reflecting on decades of service, the novel examines the costs of a life devoted to professional duty at the expense of personal intimacy. On the surface, Stevens' solitude appears to be the product of circumstance, his loyalty to Lord Darlington, his meticulous pursuit of dignity, and his repression of emotion. Yet, as the novel unfolds, solitude emerges as a profound existential condition, an outcome of choices, ideals, and the inability to bridge the gap between inner desire and outward restraint. Stevens' solitude is shaped most visibly by his unwavering dedication to service. For him, dignity is the highest professional value, a quality that demands emotional restraint, self-discipline, and absolute devotion to the household he serves. This philosophy isolates him from genuine human connection. He refrains from speaking openly, from laughing too freely, from showing vulnerability, even when kindness or honesty might draw others closer. In one of the most striking examples, Stevens remains at his post during his father's death, choosing professional responsibility over familial intimacy. His solitude is not simply imposed, it is self-constructed, a consequence of defining his identity entirely through his role as butler. And at the heart of the novel lies Stevens' relationship with Miss Kenton, the housekeeper who works alongside him for many years. Their interactions are filled with unspoken affection, quiet tensions, and moments of near confession. Yet Stevens' inability to act on his feelings, his silence with Miss Kenton, tentatively offers companionship. His refusal to acknowledge her sadness in her marriage exemplifies how solitude takes root in missed opportunities. Unlike the books I've previously mentioned, Ishiguro shows how solitude can persist precisely because connections are never fully realized. Stevens' loneliness is sharpened by the knowledge that intimacy was possible, yet deliberately evaded. Memory plays a crucial role in shaping this solitude. The narrative unfolds through Stevens' road trip across the English countryside, during which he recalls episodes from his years at Darlington Hall. These recollections are coloured by denial and rationalisation. Stevens defends Lord Darlington's misguided politics, justifies his own inaction, and frames his past decisions in terms of duty. Yet the gaps and the evasions and hesitations in his narration reveal the solitude of a man who cannot face his own emotional truth. What Stevens has lost cannot be reclaimed, and his reflections only underscore the emptiness of the present. This solitude is also deeply tied to questions of national identity. Set against the backdrop of pre- and post-war England, the novel reflects the decline of the great houses and the fading of a social order in which butlers like Stevens once took pride. Stevens finds himself solitary because the society he served has vanished. Yet unlike Thoreau and Walden, who embraces solitude as liberation, Stevens experiences it as quiet devastation, a realization that he has given his life to ideals that no longer hold value. In many ways, Stevens resembles John Williams' Stoner. Both men devote themselves to work, Stoner to literature, Stevens to service, and both endure emotional disappointments that leave them profoundly alone. Yet while Stoner finds a measure of dignity and perseverance, Stevens' solitude is tinged with regret. His life of restraint leaves him without the comfort of love, family, or meaningful companionship. His belated recognition of this, especially in the meeting with Miss Kenton, now Mrs. Benn, renders his solitude more tragic, for it is not simply circumstantial, but irreversible. The novel's closing scenes crystallize this solitude. Sitting by the seaside, Stevens reflects on his life and acknowledges, almost reluctantly, the possibility that he has wasted his chances for happiness. His consolation is modest. He resolves to learn bantering, to engage more openly with others in the little time he has left. Yet the poignancy of this resolution lies in its belatedness. Solitude for Stevens is not just a condition of the present, but the residue of a lifetime of choices, habits, and missed opportunities. The Remains of the Day thus portrays solitude as the shadow cast by duty, restraint, and time. Stevens' life demonstrates how isolation is not only the absence of others, but the consequence of suppressing one's own inner life. The novel is a quiet tragedy, a reminder that solitude, when born of denial and missed intimacy, is as permanent as the passage of time. My next choice is by Tove Jansson, The Summer Book. This is a quiet masterpiece about a grandmother and her young granddaughter Sophia who spend a summer together on a small Finnish island. The novel is episodic, composed of short vignettes rather than a single linear narrative, and in this simplicity lies its power. Through the characters' daily activities like building boats and exploring the shore, planting gardens and quarrelling and reconciling, Jansson creates a meditation on solitude, companionship, and the way nature structures human experience. Jansson is portraying solitude as something gentle, something natural, and inextricable from the rhythms of life. The setting itself emphasizes solitude. The island is small, it's windswept, and surrounded by water, both beautiful and isolating. With few visitors and little contact with the outside world, the grandmother and Sophia live in near complete seclusion. Yet this solitude is not bleak. Instead, it fosters attentiveness. Every flower, tide, change, and storm takes on significance, shaping their days. Jansson suggests that solitude, especially in nature, heightens awareness, drawing attention to the delicate details of existence that would otherwise pass unnoticed. At the same time, solitude is shared. The relationship between grandmother and granddaughter lies at the heart of the book. Their companionship does not erase their solitude, but coexists with it, creating a subtle interplay between intimacy and distance. The grandmother is aging, physically frail and sometimes withdrawn, while Sophia is curious and energetic and impulsive. Their exchanges range from tender to irritable, but their mutual presence gives shape to the summer. The episodic form reinforces this vision of solitude. Rather than a grand arc, the novel unfolds in fragments, moments of exploration, reflection, and small-scale adventure. Each vignette carries its own mood, playfulness, melancholy, contemplation. This structure mirrors the way solitude is experienced in life, not as a single state, but as a series of shifting moments. A deeper solitude pervades the book, the solitude of grief. Sophia's mother has died before the novel begins, and though this is never dwelt upon, it haunts the narrative. Both grandmother and granddaughter live with this absence, which shapes their conversations and silences. The island, with its openness and exposure, becomes a space where loss can be felt without being constantly named. Unlike the unspoken solitude of Stevens in The Remains of the Day, which emerges from repression and regret, Sophia's solitude is raw and childlike, while the grandmother's is tempered by age and experience. Together they learn to inhabit grief quietly, without dissolving into despair. Jansson is portraying solitude as a natural rhythm of life, interwoven with companionship, memory, and place. Her solitude is not tragic or heroic, but ordinary, shaped by daily tasks, fleeting moods, and the slow passage of summer. The prose style itself embodies this vision. Jansson's writing is lyrical and understated. She captures the texture of bark, the sound of waves, the stubbornness of a child, the wry humour of an old woman. Nothing is exaggerated, and yet everything resonates. Solitude here is not dramatized, but lived, suggested in pauses, in the space between words, in the quiet persistence on the island landscape. By the end of the book, summer wanes, and the inevitability of parting looms, whether seasonal or mortal. Yet the mood is not one of despair, but acceptance. Solitude, Jansson shows, is part of life's ebb and flow, just as much as companionship. To live on an island, to live through loss, to live through aging and growing, these are all forms of solitude, but they need not be bleak. They can be gentle, reflective, and filled with meaning. Jansson offers a vision of solitude that is deeply humane, quiet, attentive, and sustained by love, even in the face of grief. My next choice is Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf is a novel steeped in solitude, both thematically and formally. Written in 1927, during the tumultuous years between the world wars, the book reflects the disorientation of modern life and the existential isolation of the individual in a fractured society. At its heart is Harry Haller, a middle-aged intellectual alienated from both the bourgeois world he inhabits and the deeper spiritual fulfillment he craves. His solitude is not merely circumstantial, it is a profound existential condition. Steppenwolf explores how loneliness becomes both a prison and a catalyst for self-discovery, making it one of the 20th century's incisive studies on isolation. From the very opening pages, Harry is presented as a figure defined by his solitude. He lives in a rented room, moving about anonymously, avoiding meaningful relationships and finding no comfort in the company of others. He identifies himself as a wolf on the steppes, a solitary creature forced to live on the margins of society. This metaphor captures not only his estrangement from bourgeois conventions, but also the violent tensions within himself, part human, part beast, part cultured intellectual, and part instinctual outsider. His solitude arises from this fractured identity, unable to fully belong to any world. He wanders between them, condemned to loneliness. Harry's alienation is not just social, it is metaphysical. He is painfully aware of the futility of his existence, of the hypocrisies of middle-class life, and the collapse of spiritual depth in a modern, mechanized world. His solitude is sharpened by his intellect. He sees too clearly the absurdities around him and cannot participate in them without feeling inauthentic. This awareness locks him into a self-enclosed suffering, where he contemplates suicide as a possible escape. His solitude becomes almost unbearable, a condition of radical disconnection not only from society, but also from himself. Yet solitude in Steppenwolf is not depicted as wholly negative. It also opens the door to transformation. The turning point comes when Harry encounters Hermann, a mysterious woman who becomes his guide into a world of sensuality, pleasure, and self-discovery. Hermann introduces him to dance halls, jazz, and erotic encounters, elements of life he has long shunned. Paradoxically, it is precisely through his intense solitude that Harry is able to enter his new realm. Only because he has been estranged for so long is he prepared to experience the liberation that Hermann represents. His loneliness becomes the ground upon which the possibility of connection, however fleeting, can be built. The climactic magic theatre sequence dramatizes this tension. Entering a hall of mirrors and fantastical experiences, Harry confronts the many facets of his personality. Here, solitude becomes psychedelic, a space of radical self-confrontation where he sees not only his alienation but also the absurdity of clinging to it. The magic theatre suggests that to overcome solitude, one must accept life's contradictions, laugh at its seriousness, and embrace the plurality with oneself. Still, the novel does not resolve Harry's solitude in a neat or comforting way. By the end, he has not escaped his isolation, but glimpsed a new perspective on it. Solitude remains his condition, but its meaning has shifted. It is no longer purely a source of despair, but a pathway toward deeper self-knowledge. Through solitude, he learns that the self is infinite, not fixed, that alienation can contain the seed of renewal. In Steppenwolf, Hesse transforms solitude into a metaphysical stage upon which the drama of modern man is enacted. Harry Haller's alienation embodies the loneliness of the intellectual in a fragmented age, caught between tradition and modernity, spirit and flesh, meaning and absurdity. Yet the novel refuses to leave solitude as a condition of hopeless despair. Instead, it suggests that in embracing the fractured self, in laughing at the seriousness of existence, and in opening oneself to multiplicity, solitude can become not only bearable, but transformative. Next, I have Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Few novels explore the torment of solitude as brutally and honestly as Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. Published in 1864, it presents one of literature's most unsettling narrators, the underground man, a retired civil servant living in self-imposed exile. He speaks directly to the reader in a confession that is both a rant and an indictment of modern rationalist philosophy. His solitude is absolute, not only physical but psychological, intellectual and spiritual. It is a solitude that feeds upon itself, intensifying into self-loathing and alienation from the world. The underground man embodies solitude from the very first line. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. His sickness is not physical but existential. He is withdrawn from society, locked away in a small St. Petersburg apartment where he stews in bitterness and resentment. Unlike Thoreau's solitude in Walden, which is chosen as a path to enlightenment, the underground man's solitude is corrosive and compulsive. It is not the peaceful retreat of a philosopher, but the claustrophobic isolation of someone unable to reconcile himself with others or with himself. Central to his solitude is his hyperconsciousness. He is painfully, almost pathologically self-aware. This excessive self-reflection prevents him from acting, from connecting with others, and from achieving any kind of peace. He sees through the illusions of progress and rationality, but this insight brings him no comfort. Instead, it paralyzes him. Solitude, in his case, is the price of seeing too clearly. He cannot belong to the social order he despises, yet he cannot escape the torment of needing recognition from it. He is trapped in an endless cycle of withdrawal and yearning. The first part of Notes from Underground illustrates this paradox most starkly. Here the underground man philosophizes about free will, rationality, and human nature. His solitude is intellectual as well as personal. He stands apart from society's prevailing values, mocking the idea that man can be perfected by reason or science. But his rebellion leaves him rootless. He undermines every belief without offering any alternative. In rejecting society, he also rejects belonging, leaving himself stranded in a private hell of contradiction. The second part of the novel shows the practical consequences of this solitude in his interactions with others. He humiliates himself at a dinner party with old acquaintances, where his desperation for acceptance clashes with his disdain for them. He seeks out a prostitute called Liza, not out of love, but as a twisted attempt to assert power. Yet when she responds with unexpected compassion, he recoils, lashing out and driving her away. In these moments, solitude becomes almost violent, an act of destruction or of any possibility of intimacy. The underground man cannot sustain connection because his identity depends on his estrangement. What makes Dostoevsky's portrayal so powerful is that solitude here is not accidental. The underground man chooses it, he cultivates it, and even takes pride in it. His underground existence becomes a perverse badge of honor, a way to assert individuality against the conformist society he despises. Yet this pride is inseparable from self-hatred. He mocks his own pettiness and cruelty even as he indulges them. His solitude is thus both chosen and suffered, both empowering and annihilating. At a deeper level, the novel suggests that solitude is an unavoidable part of the human condition in modernity. The underground man represents the alienation of the individual in a society that values rational systems over personal freedom, conformity over individuality. He is cut off not only from others but from the very possibility of meaning. The underground man's solitude is destructive, it is corrosive, and at times unbearable, yet it reveals something essential about the human condition, that to be conscious is to be alone, and that the price of awareness may be isolation. Dostoevsky's genius lies in showing how solitude can become both a curse and a perverse form of truth. Next, I have The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. This is a profound exploration of human loneliness and the fragile bonds that attempt to mitigate it. Set in a small town in Georgia during the 1930s, the novel follows a cast of characters whose lives intersect through John Singer, a deaf-mute man who becomes the unintentional confidant of those around him. McCullers portrays solitude in multiple forms, physical, emotional, and social, and examines how isolation shapes perception, interaction, and the longing for connection. McCullers' characters live in solitude while surrounded by others, creating a poignant study of the loneliness inherent in human life. At the centre of the novel is John Singer, whose muteness renders him both an object of empathy and a vessel for projection. People confide in him precisely because he cannot respond in conventional speech, and yet this very quality underscores his isolation. Singer's silence is a double-edged sword. It enables others to express their inner lives, but it also prevents him from fully participating in those lives. He becomes a mirror for others' emotions while remaining fundamentally alone. Singer embodies solitude not as choice or philosophical principle, but as a structural condition of human communication and comprehension. Ultimately, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter presents solitude as both universal and profoundly human. While characters may form transient bonds, express empathy, and seek understanding, the novel acknowledges that isolation is an inherent part of existence. McCullers' work complements other literary explorations of solitude, like Stoner's quiet perseverance, Stevens's reflective regret, or the professor's memory-bound isolation, by showing how solitude can persist even amid social contact, shaping identity, aspiration, and emotional life. In McCullers' Georgia Town, the human heart searches, and it yearns, and it mourns. It reaches toward others while remaining fundamentally alone. This duality, at once tender and tragic, forms the core of the novel's meditation on solitude, making The Heart is a Lonely Hunter a timeless exploration of loneliness, empathy, and the fleeting nature of human connection. And lastly, I have The Stranger by Albert Camus. Albert Camus' The Stranger is a seminal work of existential literature that explores the profound solitude of an individual confronting the absurdity of existence. The novel follows Meursault, a French-Algerian man whose detached reaction to his mother's death, casual sexual relationships, and ultimately senseless murder sets him apart from the society around him. From the opening lines, Mousseau's detachment establishes his solitude. He reports his mother's death with blunt, unemotional observation, setting a tone of disconnection from conventional human sentiment. Society immediately perceives him as abnormal, yet he neither seeks nor resists their judgment. This early scene frames his solitude as a dissonance between inner experience and social expectation. While others find meaning in ritual, in mourning, and ethical judgment, Mousseau perceives events with a directness stripped of imposed significance. His isolation is thus both imposed by society and inherent in his own perception of life. Mousseau's existential solitude intensifies following the involvement in a violent incident leading to murder. The act itself is almost arbitrary, a result of circumstance and impulse rather than passion or ideology. What matters is society's reaction. His trial emphasizes moral outrage, religious expectation, and social conformity. Mousseau, however, remains internally unaffected. He neither denies nor recognizes, confronting the absurdity of a world that seeks rational meaning in an irrational act. His solitude, in this case, is philosophical. It is the estrangement of a consciousness fully aware of the universe's indifference. Camus portrays solitude as the space in which the individual faces the absurd, unmediated by societal norms or illusions. The Stranger remains a timeless study on human isolation, challenging readers to reconsider the relationship between the self, society, and the indifferent cosmos in which we exist. So across these 10 works, solitude emerges as a complex, multifaceted experience, shaping character, perception, and human understanding. In Thoreau's Walden, it is a chosen refuge, fostering clarity, self-reliance, and communion with nature. Woolf's To the Lighthouse portrays solitude as an intimate engagement with consciousness, revealing the delicate interplay between inner life and social expectation. Stoner and Stevens experience solitude within structured lives of work and duty, quiet, dignified in one case, tinged with regret in the other, showing how personal choice, repression, and societal roles shape isolation. Ogawa's The Housekeeper and the Professor and Jansson's The Summer Book depict gentler forms of solitude, where withdrawal from the wider world coexists with human connection and attentiveness to nature. In contrast, Hesse's Steppenwolf and Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground reveal solitude as a crucible of self-awareness and existential torment, highlighting the tension between inner conflict and societal alienation. McCullers' The Heart of a Lonely Hunter explores social and emotional isolation, demonstrating that one can be surrounded by others, yet profoundly alone. And finally, Camus' The Stranger confronts solitude as existential alienation, emphasizing the absurdity of life and the individual's disconnection from societal norms. Together, these works illuminate solitude's many dimensions, voluntary or imposed, reflective or painful. They reveal how isolation can foster insight, empathy, and personal growth, or magnify despair, regret, and alienation. Across centuries and cultures and literary styles, solitude emerges as a universal human condition, revealing both the challenges and the possibilities inherent in conscious existence. In literature, solitude is never simple. It is simultaneously a mirror and a lens, illuminating the self and the society and the fragile pursuit of meaning. Through these 10 masterpieces, readers witness solitude's power, its nuance, and its enduring relevance, gaining profound insight into the human experience of being alone and ultimately into what it means to be human. Thank you again for watching one of my videos. Please remember to like and subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more video essays and reviews and top 10s coming soon. Thank you.